If you've ever seen this video from 2 years ago, I decided to make a follow-up. I know that this is or was a very difficult time, an emotional time for so many of you new parents. Getting a new diagnosis of Laryngomalacia for your newborn, and I just wanted to provide a safe space and real experience on how my child evolved from then until now, 2 years later. I could have only wished to have a video like this 2 years ago so that I could gain insight and maybe some hope on what to expect 2 years down the line. I want to preface this with every single case is different, and Laryngomalacia could be classified as mild, moderate, or severe. In our case, my child was classified as moderate Laryngomalacia and luckily did not require surgery. In many cases, this is not what happened, so please bear this in mind. I'm going to share what my main concerns were at the time and how things have changed and ended up 2 years later. My main concerns at the time were around feeding, namely, would I be able to continue breastfeeding or not? Would he ever tolerate a bottle? And what about foods? Would I introduce it as early as I did with my firstborn at 4 months old, or would it be much later? I worried about speech delays and speech development. I read a lot of blogs about how many babies with Laryngomalacia had delayed speech, and I fear that that would happen to my baby too. If you're a little confused on what Laryngomalacia actually is, you can watch my previous YouTube video on it. But essentially, it's a genetic anomaly of the larynx and upper part of the respiratory tract, and it causes inspiratory stridor or wheezing. In most affected infants, stridor peaks at around 4 to 8 months and resolves by 12 to 18 months of age. So here is how things turned out for us. Despite experiencing a lot of difficulty with breastfeeding, there was choking, noisy feeding, and many interruptions during a feed. I managed to breastfeed my baby until he was a little bit more than 1 year old. Actually, until he was about 13 months. Because the breastfeeding was difficult early on, I did consult with a breastfeeding specialist. I'm not sure how helpful they were, but they did give me some good advice about how to position myself during a feed. We attempted to introduce bottles early on, but it was almost always a very big disappointment. It would only be my husband who offered him a bottle at night, and again, there was a lot of choking. Coughing and the wheezing would always start. We reintroduced the bottle at about 4 months, but only very sparingly. He tolerated the bottle almost just as well as breastfeeding, which was significantly better at about the 4.5 month mark. By 4 months old, there was occasionally some noisy feeding during breastfeeding, but he would not be choking as much. I still didn't feel very comfortable with letting anyone feed him until he was about 1 year old. No one other than me, myself, or my husband would be the ones to feed him, but that was also a personal preference. Us Laryngomalacia parents are much more protective with our little ones, and I think it's understandable. So I want to remind you to do whatever feels right for you. As for foods, we started to introduce solids, cereals first, at about 5 to 5.5 months. He was already much better from the stridor standpoint at this time. I only had very rare episodes of choking during breastfeeding, so I felt really confident starting solids at this time. He took to them well and progressed really significantly after food introduction. We had regular follow-ups with our ENT every 3 or so months afterwards, and at about 14 months was our very last visit with the ENT, and I remember being very concerned for his speech because he wasn't saying coherent words yet, only babbling sounds, which as a parent and as a doctor, I know could still be within the normal range, even though we say that a milestone for speech at 15 months old is actually 5 words. That is what I hung on to. I continue to encourage reading every single day, speaking very clearly with my child, and encouraging his older brother to do the same. At 18 months, things really started to turn around, and that's where clear words really started to come through.
Yeah.
Bubbles. Now, at nearly 2 years old, he'll be 2 this month, he manages to put 2 clear words together, understands 2-step directions, and has met all of the motor milestones for his age. Running, moving objects into containers, taking 2 steps backwards, and he continues to develop new skills. The only remnant of his Laryngomalacia, which I continued to notice even after 4 months of hell, was that whenever he'd have even the slightest cold or viral infection, the stridorous barky cough would start. And for that reason, we treated him for croup a handful of times in his first year of life. That requires a dose of oral steroids. Not as scary as it sounds, but definitely something I didn't like him having to do. I hope today's video helped give you some perspective, but remember this, hindsight is 20/20. So as cool as I am talking about this now, I was certainly not very cool when I was in the trenches dealing with this. Going to follow-up appointments and freaking out for every viral infection that he had in his first year of life, it's one of the hardest things that I've ever had to go through. And not even med school could have prepared me for this. If this video helped you out, please give it a thumbs up and let me know in the comments what you want to see more of.